Imagine a dark corridor in the heart of the Imperial Palace of Rome. It is January, 41 AD. The emperor walks confidently, surrounded by a few guards. He believes himself untouchable, even divine. But what he does not know is that within seconds he will be attacked by those who swore to protect him. That moment will change history forever, the fall of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, the man the world would remember as Caligula. How did a young heir, loved by the people and a descendant of Germanicus, become the most feared, hated, and ultimately betrayed emperor of Rome? Behind his story lies a journey marked by family tragedy, manipulation of power, an unprecedented religious cult, and a final conspiracy that sealed his fate. Today we will trace his life from the military camps where he earned his childhood nickname to the conspiracy that brought him down, analyzing not only the excesses that made him famous but also the historical context that explains why Rome never forgot his name. Stay with us, because what you will discover about Caligula is not the simple myth of the mad emperor, but a far more disturbing portrait of what absolute power can do to a human being. Caligula was not born to be emperor. His real name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and he was born on August 31, 12 AD, in the coastal city of Antium. He was the son of Germanicus, Rome's most beloved general, and Agrippina the Younger, a direct descendant of the first emperor, Augustus. His childhood, far from the luxuries of the court, was spent in military camps alongside his father. The legionaries adored him. They saw in him the son of their commander, but also a kind of living talisman. They dressed him in tiny armor and custom-made military sandals. Tenderly, they began to call him Caligula, which means, little boots. What for them was a gesture of affection would become an indelible mark in history, a nickname that Gaius himself would come to hate, but that would define his destiny. In those years, surrounded by discipline, loyalty, and the roar of war drums, young Caligula breathed the spirit of Rome. To many, he was just a child with a funny nickname. To others, the future was beginning to write a name that posterity would associate with madness, power, and tragedy. When Caligula was only 7 years old, fate took from him what seemed a life marked for glory. His father, Germanicus, was on a military campaign in the east when he fell suddenly ill. High fevers, convulsions, and inexplicable physical deterioration led to his death in Antioch in 19 AD. For the empire, it was a national tragedy. Germanicus was not only a victorious general, he was the natural heir to the throne. For young Gaius, it was the start of a chain of losses that would shape his character forever. Suspicion never left that episode. Many believed Germanicus had been poisoned on the orders of Emperor Tiberius, jealous of his popularity and fearful that he would one day overthrow him. Though it was never proven, the rumor spread like wildfire through Rome and lodged itself in the mind of Agrippina the Elder, Caligula's mother. Consumed by anger and an obsession to avenge her husband, she turned the lives of her children into a constant war against Tiberius. Thus, Caligula learned a lesson that would stay with him his entire life. In Rome, power was not only inherited, it was taken, and betrayal could hide even at the family table. By the age of 19, Caligula had lost almost his entire family. His mother was exiled and died alone, his older brothers were imprisoned and executed. Only he remained. It was then that Emperor Tiberius, the very man whom many blamed for these misfortunes, made a decision that would mark the young man forever. He brought him to live on the island of Capri. Capri appeared to be a paradise. Majestic villas overlooking the sea, lush gardens, and a climate that invited retreat. But in reality, it was a stage for control, intrigue, and power exercised without limits. Tiberius had made the island his personal refuge, far from the Senate and the eyes of the people, where his will was law. There, Caligula learned to survive. He discovered that in Rome, power was sustained not only by the sword, but by fear, manipulation, and masks. While others broke under the oppressive environment of Capri, he adapted. He hid his true thoughts behind a servile smile, and that skill made him Tiberius's favorite. The old emperor even described him with a chilling phrase, "I am raising a viper for the Roman people." And he was not wrong. In Capri, Caligula not only inherited a throne, he also absorbed a vision of power as a cruel game in which human dignity was the first currency. On March 16, 37 AD, Tiberius died at his villa on Capri. Some rumors suggested that Caligula may have hastened that end, though it was never proven. The fact remains that, at just 24 years old, the young heir became the new emperor of Rome. The news sparked euphoria unseen in decades. The people, exhausted by years of repression and paranoia under Tiberius, saw in Caligula a bright hope. He was young, charismatic, a descendant of beloved Germanicus, and seemed like the promise of a return to the greatness of Augustus. When he entered Rome, the streets overflowed. Crowds hailed him as, "Our boy, our star." Veterans of his father's legions wept upon seeing the general's son become emperor. Rome seemed to be reborn. And during the first months, Caligula met expectations. He granted amnesties to political prisoners, returned confiscated lands, organized grand spectacles, and handed generous bonuses to the soldiers. The people smiled again, the Senate applauded, and chroniclers described him as the ideal emperor. But that radiant image was only a mask. Behind the popular gestures lurked a man marked by trauma and mistrust. And very soon, Rome would discover that it had raised to the throne someone very different from what they had dreamed of. The first months of glory soon gave way to unsettling signs. Caligula began elevating the status of his three sisters, Agrippina the Younger, Drusilla, and Livilla, to a level never seen in Rome. He ordered that their names be included in the official oaths of the empire. Every citizen had to swear loyalty not only to the emperor but also to his sisters. He had coins minted with their faces, an honor reserved almost exclusively for goddesses. And at banquets, he placed each of them in the seat of honor, relegating his own wife to a secondary position. To some, these gestures seemed like simple family extravagances. But in reality, they were a political declaration. Caligula was challenging the most sacred norms of Roman society. He was building a new order in which the imperial family was not only the head of the state but also a religious and moral symbol above any tradition. Soon, rumors began to spread through the Senate and the palace corridors. Talk circulated of a relationship too close between Caligula and his sisters, especially with Drusilla, whom he treated with an intimacy far beyond what was acceptable. What Rome did not yet know was that these gestures were only the prelude to a moral and political revolution that would shake the foundations of the empire. Among all his sisters, one held a special place in Caligula's heart, Drusilla. From their youth, they shared an intense bond forged in the pain of losing their father and seeing their family destroyed by imperial intrigues. That bond, over time, became inseparable, and for many, suspiciously intimate. In the year 38 AD, when Drusilla suddenly died at just 21, all of Rome fell silent. For the emperor, it was a devastating blow. Caligula locked himself away for days, refusing to eat or receive visitors. When he finally reappeared, he was no longer the same. In an unprecedented act, he declared Drusilla a living goddess, Diva Drusilla Panthea. He ordered temples in her honor, priests dedicated exclusively to her cult, and public ceremonies rivaling those of Rome's traditional gods. For the first time, a woman who was not an empress was elevated to divine status, and it was not by the Senate's decision but by the emperor's personal decree. The city was compelled to venerate Drusilla as if she were an Olympian deity. But beyond the political aspect, the tragedy revealed something deeper. Caligula's obsession with her had crossed the boundary of the human and the rational. For many, that was the moment when the line between man and God was erased in the young emperor's mind. After Drusilla's death, something changed forever in Caligula. The young emperor no longer saw himself as a man marked by pain but as someone who had crossed a divine threshold. If his sister could be worshipped as a goddess, why not himself? Thus began his self-deification. He had statues of himself placed in temples throughout the empire, not as homage to a mortal ruler, but as objects of worship. He ordered daily rituals where citizens had to offer sacrifices to his image, under penalty of death for anyone showing irreverence. In Rome, he even transformed palace halls into shrines dedicated to his own divinity. The most famous artists of the empire received a peculiar commission, to depict Caligula with attributes of the gods. Sometimes he appeared with Jupiter's lightning bolts, other times with Neptune's trident, and statues were even made with interchangeable faces so he could embody different deities at will. But the most dangerous aspect was not the display itself, but the logic underpinning his delusion. Caligula claimed that, as a god, he was not bound by human laws or Roman morality. Religion, politics, and daily life were all subject to his absolute will. Rome was beginning to understand that the emperor they had once welcomed with flowers and cheers now demanded a place among the gods, and was willing to punish any doubt about it as heresy. In the year 39 AD, Caligula decided to give the world a display of power that defied logic. He ordered the construction of a floating bridge connecting the Bay of Baiae with the port of Puteoli, a distance of more than 3 kilometers over the sea. Dozens of ships were lined up and anchored, creating a colossal platform on which planks, sand, and even watch posts were placed, as if it were a true Roman road stretched across the waves. For 2 consecutive days, the emperor paraded along this bridge dressed in the armor of Alexander the Great, mounted on horseback, followed by troops and war chariots. The whole of Rome was astonished, some saw it as a gesture of grandeur, others as an excessive eccentricity. The chronicles claim that the project cost an incalculable fortune and that its purpose was purely symbolic, to show that nothing, not even the sea, could stop the emperor's will. For Caligula, it was the ultimate proof that his power rivaled that of the gods. But for the people and the Senate, it was confirmation that the young ruler was willing to sacrifice wealth and stability merely to feed his ego. The Baiae Bridge was not a simple architectural whim, it was a warning of the megalomania beginning to consume him. While rumors of his excesses spread in Rome, in the eastern provinces Caligula's reign unleashed an even greater storm. In 38 AD, serious disturbances erupted in Alexandria, a cosmopolitan city where Greeks, Egyptians, and one of the most important Jewish communities in the Mediterranean lived side by side. Clashes between Greeks and Jews were violent, and when complaints reached the emperor, Caligula made a decision that would ignite passions. He ordered that his statue be placed in the very temple of Jerusalem. For the Jews, this was an intolerable desecration. The temple could only be dedicated to the one God, and the imposition of an imperial image was seen as the greatest sacrilege. Ancient sources, such as Philo of Alexandria and Flavius Josephus, recount how the order triggered a diplomatic conflict of enormous proportions. The governor of Syria, Petronius, even delayed the construction of the statue to prevent a widespread uprising in Judea. Tensions were so high that for a moment, the empire teetered on the brink of a large-scale rebellion. Although the statue was never erected, the episode made one unsettling thing clear: Caligula's self-deification was no longer merely a Roman domestic affair. His delusions of grandeur were threatening the delicate religious and political balance of the entire eastern Mediterranean. What had initially been jubilation soon turned into disillusionment. In just a few years, Caligula had exhausted the treasury he inherited from Tiberius with feasts, spectacles, and monumental projects. To sustain his style of rule, he imposed new suffocating taxes and began confiscating the properties of senators and noble families. The Senate, which traditionally tolerated even authoritarian emperors as long as appearances were maintained, began to feel humiliated. The emperor ridiculed senators in public, seized their wealth, and forced them to applaud his whims. The Praetorian Guard, his own bodyguards, were no better. Caligula despised them, calling them "my armed slaves," and subjected his officers to constant humiliation. One of them, Cassius Chaerea, became a frequent target of mockery, forced to use ridiculous and degrading passwords during military service. Even the people, who had adored him during his rise, began to turn against him. High taxes, inflation, and a climate of fear due to arbitrary executions destroyed the image of the people's emperor. Amid it all, increasingly extravagant rumors circulated, that he planned to move the capital to Alexandria, that he considered appointing his horse Incitatus as consul. Whether true or not, these rumors confirmed one thing for Rome: Caligula had crossed the line of tolerance. On January 24, 41 AD, Rome awoke as on any other day of spectacles and ceremonies. But in the halls of the imperial palace, betrayal hung in the air. A secret conspiracy, woven by senators, courtiers, and above all, by members of the Praetorian Guard themselves, was about to be executed. The plan was simple: take advantage of a narrow corridor on the Palatine, where the emperor would pass without his full guard. At the head of the plot was Cassius Chaerea, the tribune repeatedly humiliated by Caligula. When the young emperor entered that hallway, he might have thought it was another theatrical performance. But in seconds, the swords gleamed. The first strike pierced him, and then dozens more followed. Caligula, the man who believed himself a god, was stabbed more than 30 times on the floor of his own palace. His wife, Caesonia, and his young daughter were killed shortly after, to erase any attempt at succession. The living deity who had demanded absolute reverence expired like any mortal, surrounded by blood and betrayal. That day, Rome did not merely end an emperor's life, it ended a myth that had polarized the entire empire. For some, his death was an act of justice. For others, especially among the people who enjoyed his games and largesse, it was an unexpected loss. Thus fell Caligula, amid cheers of liberation and the tears of those who still followed him. Caligula went down in history as the emperor who wanted to be a god but ended up dying as an ordinary man. To some, he was the symbol of corrupted absolute power, to others, a victim of hostile propaganda that turned him into a monster. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a young man marked by tragedy who, upon receiving the most powerful crown in the world, mistook his pain for greatness and his ambition for divinity. His story is an eternal warning: when power is concentrated without limits, gods may rise, but they can also fall in a single breath. And now the question is for you. Do you think Caligula was truly an uncontrollable madman or a leader turned villain by his enemies? Leave your thoughts in the comments, share this video if this story surprised you, and subscribe to discover more fascinating episodes from the past that continue to resonate in our present.